Boom. Nathan Bedford Forrest. We're going to go over a true history of the man. He has been smeared. His grave was vandalized. His bones were dug up. His statues are being taken down. They're now renaming bases. President Trump vetoed that NDAA. It was overridden, and included in that was a lot of pork, including the renaming of U.S. bases that are named after Confederate generals. Why? Because it's a complete war on Southern culture. I would argue on American culture, period. They've been tearing down statues, including of Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, other presidents. And of course, it started with Confederate memorials because the leftist media associates that, as it does with everything else in the world, to racism. Oh, wow. People were racist in the 1860s. Shocking. Where do you draw the line? It is a slippery slope. But Forrest in particular was smeared by Hollywood by a movie called Forrest Gump. And again, if you were learning history from Forrest Gump, you got serious problems. So their defense was, hey, it's fiction. All the events in Forrest Gump are fiction, including its claims about Nathan Bedford Forrest. But you can tell by the fact that the movie's titled Forrest Gump that they named him Forrest just to write that joke into the picture and smear Southern history. There's no other purpose for it. And of course, it made Alabama look bad. It's just the whole Forrest Gump movie was propaganda against the South. Made it look like a bunch of simpletons. Anyway, we're going to talk about the real history of Nathan Bedford Forrest. He's very interesting, controversial, and important, integral historical figure. And people ought to study what the man really did and why he's honored in some parts. And so Scott Dawson from Dawson and Dawson is on to talk about Nathan Forrest. I'll give you the floor, sir.
All right. Well, like you said, he's a controversial figure. He's had his grave dug up. His wife's grave was dug up too. I think that's disgusting. But yeah, the movie Forrest Gump claimed that Forrest started the KKK, which is not true. Forrest was accused of this during his lifetime too, and he always denied it. And he condemned the Klan, especially their use of violence and intimidation. The Klan did approach Forrest, saying that their goals were to get the right to vote again, because Southerners weren't allowed to vote after the war for like 15 years.
And that probably was
Forrest,
a goal, but that, come on. Yeah. That's not what they're doing.
Well, Forrest agreed with that goal, but he said that the vandalism and the violence were not the way to do it, and it was cowardly how they were doing it. And, Forrest was a racist by today's standards, and even by 1800 standards, but he did not start the Klan. That's false. So let's just start with who he actually was. He's born dirt poor in Chapel Hill, Tennessee, not to be confused with Chapel Hill, North Carolina. But Chapel Hill, Tennessee is south of Nashville on the Duck River. It's the middle of nowhere near Mississippi. His father was a blacksmith who died when he was 16. His mom had 11 children. 5 boys made it to adulthood. And Forrest took care of all of them when his dad died until his mom remarried. He lived in Mississippi for a little while. When he was 20 years old, he went down there and worked for his uncle Jonathan, who was a tailor. And that area of northern Mississippi and southern Tennessee was rough. There's a lot of outlaws. There's a lot of violence, and he had a very violent upbringing, got in a ton of fights. He never went to school except for about 3 months. He could barely read and write. He had to teach himself as an adult. And he was working for his uncle, and his uncle got jumped by 5 men that killed him.
They're the
Matlock brothers. Right? Yeah, he was a tailor. And Forrest avenged his uncle's death. He had a 2-shot pistol, and he shot 2 of the men, and then he stabbed 2 of the others with a knife that was thrown to him in the fight. And they were punching and kicking him, and he got slammed. But he was fighting 5 people, and he won. He killed 2 of them. And I guess the 5th one got away, but one of the guys that he stabbed, the 2 guys that he stabbed lived. The 2 guys he shot were both headshots. But one of the guys that he stabbed ended up serving under him during the war, which is kind of ironic. Forrest got married that same year. He moved to Memphis. So he becomes a millionaire. He started a stagecoach business. That's not what got him rich though. Later he got into cotton and slaves. They Atlantic slave trade ended a long time before Forrest was even born, when Jefferson was president. And when the South seceded, they didn't renew that either. Um, Slavery was being phased out in the North, and because northern states, a lot of people don't know this. Northern states had slaves too, and I'm not just talking about the border states. I'm
All
talking
of them had
about New
them.
York, like all of them did.
New Jersey was
And
the
one
last
by
to get rid
one,
of them. I like to point out the irony that it was
yeah,
all Southern presidents that ended this discrimination. Jefferson from Virginia ended the transatlantic slave trade. Andrew Johnson from Tennessee is who passed the 13th Amendment ending slavery, at least on paper. And Lyndon Johnson from Texas implemented the Civil Rights Movement and desegregation. So all three were Southern presidents. Now, they all had other problems, LBJ especially, but it's odd that for all their rhetoric, no Northern president ever gave them any rights whatsoever.
yeah.
And slavery continued
Okay,
after the
so
Civil War
quickly,
and after the 13th Amendment. They enslaved the Chinese, and they had script pay for Irish and newly freed
yeah,
blacks. And you could argue there's offshore slavery today with the sweatshops and so on. So it's not like it outright ended, but it at least became illegal. So at least you had to do it under the table or find some other means. So slowly we're getting
yeah.
better.
There's still slavery in Ivory Coast and parts of Africa. It's sad, but
Libya, after
anyway,
Obama and Biden invaded in 2011, started selling slaves again.
I mean that's awful.
Bravo.
Um, at any rate, Pennsylvania was the first to outlaw it, pretty much right after the Revolutionary War. Good for them. The rest of the North was very slow to do it, and when they did do it, it was a slow process where they, all right, slave owners, any slave you have after such and such a date will be a slave till they're 21, and then they're free. And so it was a very gradual process. And as the northern states got rid of slavery, and they knew it was coming, they would just sell the slaves right before they were free to the Deep South. It was dirty, right? And Forrest made a killing off of slaves from the North, and then later, as slavery was being phased out in the Upper South, even in Tennessee, it was just people just didn't need them as much. It wasn't for any moral reasons that they quit doing it. Everybody was a jerk, but they were.
Well, it's how it had been
slavery,
for thousands of years. I mean, slavery's existed since ancient times throughout the world. It was just how things were.
Yeah, unfortunately, man, that is true, and he became a
There were a few
millionaire, though, which
exceptions.
is
I mean, Cyrus the Great and others who had opposed it, but it always had come back, and that's how things were. And even with serfdom, it's slavery is a gradient. You've got your kind of like chattel slavery, but serfs are a form of slaves. Sweatshops are a form of slaves. Wage slaves, not really slaves, but
yeah.
it's on the spectrum.
And they come in all colors. The word slave comes from Slavs from the Eastern Europe, and they enslaved the Irish for a good bit in the early 1600s. And I do another talk on slaves.
There were
but,
more slaves than the white slaves sold to Arabs in the Middle East and the North Africa than all of the African slaves in the Caribbean and the United States combined.
which doesn't make slavery one bit less bad.
Of course. But it's pointing out
But
there is a narrative in modern times like
right,
attaching a biological blame to slavery, like the white guys did this. Everybody had slaves. It was Western civilization that first ended slavery. It was Western civilization that first had universal suffrage too. So if you're going to do that, it's Europeans, the British, etc., that start phasing this out before anyone else, with the exception of a couple blips in ancient times like Cyrus the Great,
right.
and had to force that on the rest of the world. They were still trading slaves in Brazil and Africa and stuff on into, last century.
80s, 1880s,
Yep.
1888 for Brazil.
1900s in some places.
Yeah, it's terrible. Anyhow, Forrest made a lot of money making a commission uh, selling slaves and cotton. Um, so, you know, he was a big guy, 6'2". He liked to fight. 6'2" is huge back then. The average guy at the time was 5'7.5" in both armies. In fact, in the Northern Army, there was only one man in the entire army taller than Lincoln, and Lincoln was 6'4". Today,
And
you
Lincoln
couldn't
had
find a middle school that didn't have that.
Marfan syndrome too, so he had a
Yeah.
form of giantism. So did his mother.
Yep. So anyway, getting to the good part, I guess, when the war broke out, Forrest still living in Memphis, and he's a millionaire, and he signed up to be a private, but he was the richest man in Tennessee and possibly the entire South. So he ended up being asked to raise a regiment, and he did 650 cavalrymen, horseback guys, and he armed them with shotguns in the beginning, and he paid for it himself.
He's a
He paid for
millionaire,
all the
wasn't he?
guns and all of it himself. He was a millionaire, and which is like a billionaire now. And the Confederate Army was different from the North. Everything under a brigadier general they voted for. Somebody from up high could appoint you as well, but you think that would be a disaster, but it wasn't. They picked guys that they knew weren't going to get them killed. And Forrest was not easy.
Well, weren't
on
they
his
also
men at
drawing
all.
from people who had been in the Mexican War or the Indian Wars, or had proven their?
Usually, Forrest is an exception. I think they picked him because he was rich and paid for all the guns and this and that, and they made him a colonel like pretty quickly because of that. But he showed that he deserved it early, very early, 1861. Right, you don't hear of too many battles in that year, but in November of that year, I mean, some of the southern states still hadn't even seceded yet, right? But he is already ambushing Union gunboats in Kentucky with the cavalry, and he had his first fight up there in Kentucky, a surprise attack called Sacramento, where he ambushed 500 Union soldiers, and he only had two or 300 himself, depending on which account you read, but certainly less than his opponent. And what he did is he divided his forces. He had some of them dismount and used them as infantry to start the fight, and hid behind some bushes and a fence. And then he took 30 cavalry guys, only 30, and swung them around to the left, and then 60 and swung them around to the right. And he fired the first shot himself, and the Union started firing back at the center, was where the infantry hit the center of these guys. And then he had the cavalry charge from both sides. And even though the Union outnumbered them ridiculously, they didn't know that. And a panic ensued, and it ended up being a complete rout. Only 2 Confederates were killed and 3 wounded. He captured 35 guys, and they killed about 100. One
Wow.
private wrote that he saw Forrest personally kill 9 people. It's probably an exaggeration. The other 3 accounts that I read all said that he killed 3. So I'm gonna go with 3.
Not to
He
completely
did
dork out, but that's a maneuver of Alexander the Great used to do with his companion cavalry on the right side and pincer them on the left at the same time. And again, they wouldn't know how many are coming or not.
right, and Forrest mounted and led that charge on the right as well, and he got his shoulder dislocated in that. 2 horses that didn't have riders on them slammed into him, and he ended up dislocating his shoulder. He also had a horse shot out from under him. So even if it's a small little scrap, you're talking hundreds on each side, and later you have tens of thousands on each side. He was right in the thick of it. I mean, if he lost a horse, dislocated his shoulder, killed at least 3 people himself. So he wasn't one of those guys who sat on a hill with binoculars and sent orders.
When
And
you're
he got in
talking
there
like a
himself.
2 to 100 ratio, that's
Yeah.
something no army can afford, no matter how big the Northern Army is. If they lose 100 guys and they're only killing 2 plus a horse, that's not a good ratio for them.
No, and it was panic. This is the first battle any of these Yankees have been in, the first battle any of these guys have been in, except for some of Forrest's guys had ambushed a couple gunboats, but that wasn't
And that
even
makes a
considered.
big difference, having experience on the ground. A lot of these green people, they fire, they get too nervous, they reload their gun, they drop it and run away or whatever. And the North really thought, oh, we're going to lick them in a couple of weeks. This will be easy. And just, how wrong that was.
They both thought that. It was ignorant as hell. Um, so anyway, that was his first little fight was there in Kentucky, and
They both
usually
thought that
when people
according to
talk,
Gone with the Wind, but I don't know, man. I think a lot of well, I don't know about the common people, but the Southern generals knew this is going to be a war of attrition. We're not going to invade the North.
yeah, Lee knew that. Certain the people that were educated knew that, but the newspapers certainly did not.
Right.
It's funny when you read them. So he, he has this little scrap, and he's been very successful in Kentucky, and then he's part of the force at Fort Donelson, which was attacked by a much larger army by Grant, and they actually won. They defended the attacks 5 different times successfully, despite the numbers. And then Grant just kept bringing more and more people and the Navy with him, and it was the odds were so ridiculous they just decided to surrender. And Forrest refused to do that, and he tried to tell them, "Look, I know we can escape. They haven't surrounded us completely. I just went out and came back in. The road is flooded about waist deep for 100 yards, but after that, it's clear." And he took his regiment out and anybody else that wanted to come with him, and he put 2 guys on each horse and saved about 700 people, and they left. And Fort Donelson did surrender, but they didn't get Forrest. And so that shows that he was thinking for himself, and he didn't really care what the higher ups had to say. Um, when he broke out of Fort Donelson, and that's in northern Tennessee, like near Nashville. He's still a nobody. He's not a general yet. And his first real big battle was Shiloh. Well, that was the first real big battle for anybody. It was the largest battle that America had ever seen, period, up to that point in the war. And what it was is there's a railroad crossing in Mississippi that the Confederates desperately needed to defend, and they're outnumbered ridiculously, 44,000 against 62,000, and then there's another army of 30,000 on the way. So you got like 90,000 against 44,000. So they wanted to hit that group of 62,000 before it got to the railroads. And the North expected the South to just dig in and put cannons around and make like a little fort in front of the railroad crossing, and that's what they figured would happen. And the South was banking on hitting them when they weren't expecting it en route and try to defeat one chunk of this army at least. And not to go into Shiloh too much, but pretty much everything that could go right did the first day for the South. They did surprise the North. They ran right over Sherman. They actually shot him. Sherman got shot in the hand in that battle, and they backed him up 3 miles. And over 2,000 Yankees surrendered. They got pounded. But those guys that hung around and ended up surrendering after getting slaughtered at the Hornet's Nest, they bought time for the rest of the fleeing Yankees to regroup, and Grant was bringing in more and more reinforcements as the day went on. And he had gunboats on the river, and then the next day they outnumbered the South because ridiculous. They already outnumbered them by 20,000 people the first day. The South just got the jump on them. And the second day, the South knew it was whatever. They knew that they couldn't win, and they just fought bravely most of the day, and then they very organized retreat and left. It was shortly after that that Forrest was being pursued by some Yankees, and he just turned around and decided to charge. And his men didn't know what he was doing, but they went after him, and
That's very
they found him.
Alexander-like too.
They found him in the woods, surrounded by Yankees, and he had shot two with his pistols. He had single shot pistols, and he decapitated another guy. And one of the Yankees put a shotgun right up under his ribs and shot him, blew him right off the horse. And Forrest got up and continued to fight and killed another guy and stole his horse and then fled. And the Yankees started shooting at him, and he horse collared some other Yankee and jerked him up onto the back of the horse and used him as a human shield, and then dumped him and took off. And that's kind of when the
How many
legend of
times was
Forrest
that guy
was
shot?
born.
The shield, the guy picked up.
I think 4. And Forrest, before the war ended, was shot 4 times by the Yankees and once by the Confederate. Shot him. He had a little tiff with a captain, and I'll get into that. I guess I could tell that story now. He had a captain named Gould or Gold. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Gould. And he had lost 2 cannons, and Forrest did not like to lose cannons. Well, he didn't like to lose, period. But he transferred the guy, and the guy's feelings were hurt, and he felt dishonored. So he comes into
That's something that doesn't
Forrest.
exist today. It's going to be hard for people to understand what being dishonored means.
Right. He said, if you're saying that I'm a coward, which would be the only reason to be transferred, because if you lost 2 cannons, because sometimes it happens, then that's fine. But to be transferred, he felt like Forrest was saying you were being a bitch, and that's why he lost cannons. So he said, I will kill the man that thinks I'm a coward, and he pulled out a pistol. Forrest was unarmed, and Forrest charged him and grabbed his wrist, and the guy was able to, even when someone's holding your wrist, you can kind of bend it and shoot, and the guy shot him. He shot Forrest in the gut,
Damn.
Shot him in the abdomen, and it bounced off of the, I can't pronounce it, but basically some muscle right above the hip there, and it was just a flesh wound. But Forrest, after being shot, he's still wrestling around with the guy. He grabbed a penknife off the table and opened it with his teeth and stabbed the dude in the side. And then people rushed in and separated them, and they took the captain across the street to some other building, and the surgeon was working on him. And Forrest woke up with the surgeon working on him, and he kicked him, and he pushed everybody out of the way and said, I'm dying, and I'm going to kill the man that's shot me. And he barges out in the street with blood all over him, and he grabs 2 pistols from some guy, and he's screaming he's going to kill this captain, and the captain hears him coming and rolls off the gurney and ducks out the back door, and Forrest is shooting at him. The sad part is he shoots through the back door, and it hits a brick wall and comes back and hits some other guy in the leg, and that guy lost his leg. I mean, other than that, he was fine. And he does find the captain, and the captain's collapsed from loss of blood, and Forrest kicks him and realizes the guy can't fight back, and he says, help this man, and takes him to the hospital. And the guy dies 2 weeks later anyway, but Forrest doesn't. And anyway, that's the time he was shot by a Confederate. He was shot 4 different times by the Yankees. The first time was after the Battle of Shiloh, when the guy blew him off the horse at point blank range. I want to talk about, I can't go through every little skirmish that he did, because it's 4 years worth of crap, and about every 3rd day he's doing something. He's credited with killing 31 people in hand-to-hand combat.
Just a quick bit on Shiloh. That was hailed as a Southern victory and a Northern victory.
Oh no, no one called it a Northern victory.
Well, now it's considered Grant's great achievement or whatever, but all the papers and stuff thought otherwise,
hindsight,
and the stats say otherwise.
Yeah, the North was really irritated at Grant. They wanted to replace him. Like, how can you not put pickets out? And Grant just assumed what the South was going to do, and he was wrong. And he only won by sheer weight, And they lost 13,000 guys, and the South lost 10,000. But when you only have 44,000, that hurts you more than when you have, you know what I mean? So At any rate,
They
Shiloh
both
we can
lost
do
generals
another
as
day.
well. That Johnson was killed and Lyons was
Yeah.
captured.
Well, he couldn't. He had no feeling in his right leg anyway, because he'd been in a million wars, and he got shot there, and his boot filled up with blood, and he refused to leave. Um, General Lyons was taken in Missouri at Wilson Creek before that, but the North did lose. General Wallace was shot in the head, and General Petrius, whatever his name was, they captured him.
That's who got
It was a
killed.
big, big, big fight, man. It was horrible. Um, 23,000 casualties between the two of them. So anyway,
This was the worst the world had ever seen at the time.
yeah, at the time, but
It
it
would
got
get top
eclipsed
four more
by.
times in the same Civil War.
Yeah, it's still probably the fifth or sixth biggest battle, I'd say, in the war. I'll think about that later, but um, I think the best way to sum up Forrest is to talk about later in the war when he had real command, when he was a lieutenant general. Um, he he got in a tiff with General Bragg too after Chickamauga, which the South won. But he was pissed because Bragg didn't follow up on the victory, and he felt like he squandered a real opportunity, and he did. So he went up to Bragg, and I got the quote. We don't have a whole lot written down that Forrest said because he didn't like to read and write, but somebody else wrote it down. He was in Bragg's tent, and he said, I am not here to pass civilities or compliments with you, but other business. I have stood your meanness as long as I intend to, and you have played the part of a damned scoundrel and are a coward. If you were any part of a man, I would slap your jaws and force you to resent it. Don't issue me any more orders, for I will not obey them. And as I say to you, that if you ever again try to interfere with me or cross my path, it will be at the peril of your life.
Damn.
Needless to say, Forrest was transferred, and but Davis couldn't let him go because he was so successful. President Davis just gave him command, so he didn't have to listen to Bragg anymore, and Forrest took command. So Forrest's first kind of
Bragg
independent.
continually screwed up all the time. And he was almost as bad
Yeah,
as
the only
Grant.
reason the only reason he won Chickamauga is because of AP Hill and.
I mean, you give
and
Forrest the 90,000 guys and give Grant the 44,000 guys and see what happens then. You know?
Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
But so I'll talk about something called the Meridian Campaign, which you probably never heard of. It's in Mississippi. So what happened is late in the war in 1864, Sherman, who wasn't very good on the field. He always lost battles, even though he outnumbered people. He'd always get murked on the field. But what he was good at was terrorizing civilians and burning things to the ground and burning crops and starving people to death. And likewise was another man named Samuel Smith who did the same thing. And the goal was Sherman was going to go from Vicksburg through Jackson, Mississippi, which is directly east of Vicksburg, and go to this small city called Meridian, which is, I don't know, fifth, sixth largest city in Mississippi. Even today, it only has about 40,000 people. And Samuel Smith was going to come down from Memphis, which would put him in the northwest corner of Mississippi, march east and then south and link up with Sherman. And Samuel Smith has 7,500 guys. And Smith, his route through that northern part of Mississippi is through the most fertile part of the entire South. The soil is black as tar. And he burns 2 million bushels of corn. He's burning all the barns and burning houses and robbing the people and being, Yankee. So Forrest is sent to stop him, and Forrest only has 2,500 cavalry.
To add about Sherman after the war, he is the guy that coined the phrase "the final solution," talking about the genocide of Native Americans. That was not Adolf Hitler. That was William Tecumseh Sherman.
Yeah, and he killed the buffalo, and he was a first-round Hall of Fame ballot douchebag.
Yep. He's up there with Ralph Lane and Who else is in the Hall of Fame in the top 10? Ralph Lane and Sherman.
Henry Kissinger.
He would be if he ever had the power those other two had. But yeah.
Mitch McConnell at the moment.
Do you see where Pelosi's
Forrest,
mansion got pig-headed?
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, it is cowardly and criminal, but it's a little bit funny because when businesses were getting looted and burned,
Yeah,
she was
it.
like,
exactly.
Didn't care. So it would have been funnier if they dumped a bunch of clipped hair.
I think she'd melt if you threw water on her.
Yeah, anyway. I don't know. Hide your Dalmatians. Hey, so
she wants to make a coat.
7,500, and Forrest hates him. He used to live in northern Mississippi, so this hurts his heart to see all this destruction that these guys are doing. But he's only got 2,500 versus 7,500. But he knows the land, right? Forrest knows the land because he lived in Mississippi for part of his life, and he knew that there was some very soggy, almost marshland near Columbus, Mississippi, which is en route to, that's in Smith's route. And he wants to box Smith into this land and ambush him and crush him. All right. So near West Point, Mississippi, on today is Highway 50, there's a creek with a bridge called Ellis Bridge, a tiny little thing. And but the creek was swollen, and the bridge is really narrow, and so you couldn't cross the creek without going across the bridge because it was swollen and deep. And you know, we've learned all the way from back to Thermopylae what happens there. So that's the perfect place to ambush Smith, and that's what Forrest wants to do. And he's borrowing from Stonewall Jackson. The plan was to let the Union funnel part of the army across the bridge and then attack from both sides on the narrow column before the rest of them can cross and just crush them. But Smith is not an idiot, and he sees the Confederates hiding in the brush, and he turns around without even trying to cross the bridge. And some of the Confederates are getting a little trigger happy, and they exchange shots with the Yankees, and the ambush is ruined. And you know, Smith though heads north to what's called Okolona, Mississippi, and he keeps trying to form a battle line, but Forrest is faster and just keeps outflanking him and hitting him. It's kind of like a herd dog pushing the cattle where he wants them to go. And Forrest's brother Jeff is leading this, and unfortunately for Jeff, he gets shot in the neck, and he dies in Forrest's arms. And Forrest reportedly just kept yelling Jeffrey, Jeffrey over again. And Forrest goes completely mental. He's enraged, and he takes off on a suicide mission, just flies right into the Yankees. And he's got his guard with him. There's 60 hand-picked guys, kind of like Napoleon. So he's got 60 of the best hand-to-hand guys with him. And they go flying into this group of Yankees, and the other troops try to stop him, and he just blasts right by him and goes in. And they go to get him because they think it's suicide, and they watch him kill at least 3 men and lose 2 horses. One of the horses was shot 5 times, and his saddle was hit 3 times. But Forrest always stood up in the stirrups when he charged in, so he didn't get hit, and he just kept remounting and flying back in. And he finally got on King Philip, which is his favorite horse, and we'll talk about that horse later. And he's swarmed by Yankee soldiers, and one of his officers named McCullough says, he says, "My God, men, will you see your general killed? Because I will go to the rescue if not a man follows." And McCullough's men rush in and save him. And the rescue mission ends up turning into routing the Yankees. The feds charge 3 times, and it's hand-to-hand fighting, and it's brutal. And McCullough himself is about to get killed, and Forrest comes out of the brush and decapitates this man. And they keep fighting, and it's a running fight, and it goes on for days. And Forrest attacks day and night, won't let him sleep. Of course, his own men aren't sleeping either, but he just figures they'll tucker out first. And they did, and he chased them all the way back to Memphis and out of the state of Mississippi, right through all that scorched land. all those people that lost their houses and barns are watching the Yankees run right back down that same route with Forrest right on their ass. And he's outnumbered 7,000 something to 2,000 something, and he didn't really do it with any kind of slick General Lee chess moves. He just put it right in the face, man. And what he
Well,
called
how
putting
many
a
mounted
spear in
troops did he have of that 2,500?
all of them.
That's why.
Well, you know,
They still
whatever.
probably had the same amount of mounted on the other side.
They had more. And they were armed with one of the cavalry regiments for the North was armed with those breech loading carbines and 6-shooters and all that shit. It didn't matter.
I wonder if that's how he got some
Um,
6-shooters, taking it off the dead.
yeah, he'll arm them all with 6-shooters later. He was a big fan of that. In the beginning, he used shotguns because he thought that was good for close quarters because you can hit a lot of people. But he noticed like shooting multiple times was better. Anyway, he ran him out of there, and after being enraged about his brother getting killed, he was a big fan of keeping a scare on him, with a scare, keeping him afraid, whatever. But I guess talk about some of his other.
We got to talk
fights,
about
I guess.
his 100-degree weather battle.
Yeah, I'll do that one last. You usually hear about him disrupting Sherman's supply line and being pesky and annoying, which is a huge understatement.
That sounds like some History Channel baloney.
Yeah, well, he did do that. But okay, for example, at Johnsonville, this is great, man. Johnsonville, Tennessee. There's 4,000 Yankees there, and they've also got 4 gunboats and 28 steamboats and all 26 cannon and a warehouse full of ammo and all this crap. And it was like a big depot, big like basically staging area. And then from there would go to North Georgia to where Sherman was. And Forrest dug in across the river, and he had his artillerymen trying to sneakily dig in, and then they were going to bomb these gunboats, and then the cavalry was going to take out the rest. But they were spotted, and the gunboats opened fire.
Fighting
on these guys.
gunboats with mounted troops is kind of unheard of.
He wins, though.
I know.
This is the first time that it ever, I think the only time that ever happened. All 4 gunboats were sunk. 14 steamers, 20 barges, 26 cannon. He burns the wharf, burns the warehouse, does $2.2 million of damage, and lights a fire that's 2 miles long, and uses the light of the fire to march at night and leave.
How did he get in range and hit the boats?
Well, he went across the river, and they were digging in, and the boats opened fire on the cannons, and the cannons fired back, and they did a good job. They hit one of them 19 times, and the ships stood their ground and until they were all riddled, and only 2 Confederates died and only 15 wounded. And when he went in with his horses, people were so afraid of Forrest, they just, got murked. He also took 150 of them off as prisoners. And that's not even considered a battle. Like, that's just considered him being disruptive, right? That's an example of him being pesky, I guess.
A 2-mile-long fire. How many boats did he sink or destroy?
4 gunboats, 14 steamers, 20 barges, 26 cannons, and $2.2 million worth of damage, and 150 prisoners.
That's some William Reed stuff right there.
Yeah.
That's more than 40 boats.
He didn't always use brutality. He was at one point, he got this guy General Strait that he suckered. They've been fighting for days, and it was a real small battle. Forrest only had 500 people, and the Yankees had 1,500. Pretty normal odds, 3-1. And he sent a guy in with a white flag and said, in order to stop this fruitless slaughter and bloodshed, blah blah blah, why don't you just surrender now? And the guy was like, I'm not surrendering to you. And while he's doing it on a hill above him, Forrest had his guys walking in a circle. And so you could only see the part of the circle as it passed by the hill, and it looked like they were just marching in a straight line, and it was this huge army. So how many pieces of artillery do you have? I've counted 18. And Forrest said, I reckon that's all that's kept up. Didn't bat an eye. He only had 2.
Yeah.
But
same 2 over and over.
Yeah, they changed the flags out a little bit and things and marched them through, and it was all bullshit. And when the guy surrendered and found out he'd been snookered, he was so angry, and he's like, now, General, all is fair. That was General Straight. He did that too. So I'll go the one you want to hear about, Bryce Crossroads. Is that what you'd like?
I think if I was to pick one, you got to do the Mississippi Heat. Because,
okay.
Or
that's a good one.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them. I'll do that one.
We'll do another Forrest on more battles because it's.
Yeah, there's so many. So this guy has got another Yankee coming out of Memphis, supposed to link up with Sherman. Smith didn't do too well trying that, but they're going to try again, and this time they've got a little over 8,000 guys coming out of Memphis. But this time Forrest has got 4,500 himself, so he's only outnumbered 2-1 instead of 3-1 like normal. And the way that it worked though is that the North had 3,300 cavalry, 22 cannons, 250 wagons, and 4,800 infantry. And they were armed with the breech-loading carbine rifles and the Colt repeating rifles. And that's a huge advantage over those single-shot muskets, right? But Forrest at this point is even the odds because all of his men have 6-shooters. And he has 8 cannons versus 22, right? But he knows that the cavalry is in front of the infantry by about 3 hours. And he wants to whip the cavalry before the infantry can get there, and he knows that as soon as the battle opens up, that the infantry is going to haul ass to get there to try to, save the cavalry. And it's Mississippi, and it's June, and it's 100 degrees, and they're wearing wool, and they're from the north.
That's about 40 Celsius, by the way, somewhere around that 39 point something.
And the infantry actually had to go 6 miles to get to the fight, double quick, and the last mile, they ran. Right, so they had no energy, and he was counting on that. And he's on horseback. He's like, if we can whip the cavalry, when the infantry gets there, they won't have any fight in them. We'll run right over them. This is what he thinks anyway. But when Forrest gets there, he's not real sure exactly where the Yankees are. It's not a video game where you can just look and see. And so his men are kind of spread out searching for him, and he finds them, and he's only got 800 guys. And there's 3,300 cavalry sitting in front of him. And he forms up to charge and sounds the bugles like he's going to charge. And the 3,300 hesitate against these 800 because they don't know what Forrest has either. Because they're not playing a video game either. They don't know. And that buys them a little time. And 700 more show up on Forrest's side. And then 500 guys from Alabama. So now he's got 2,000 guys against 3,300. 2,500, like over half his force is with Bell, and they have all 8 cannons with them. And he knows that they're on the way and sends word to them where to go, but he doesn't want to wait any longer because he knows that infantry is creeping closer all the while. So he just flies straight in with 2,000 against 3,300 and just completely murks them. Hits them in the center, outflanks them on both sides, a pincer movement, classic Forrest. And right in the thick of that, the other 2,500 show up with the 8 cannons. And he's like, we're all going to charge together with one big rebel yell. That'll put the skier in them, and that'll be that. And that's exactly what happened. And he even made the cannons charge, which is ridiculous. And they got 60 yards away, and cannons are usually shooting 400 yards away or more. And he gets them 60 yards away and loads them with double canister. And at this point, the infantry for the Yankees have arrived. So they got 4,000, quote, fresh guys.
By the way, when you get that close, you risk losing your cannoneers, right? So it's like both artilleries are firing on the infantry and mounted in the middle. They don't fire to each other or whatever. You get that close and you're within range, and someone can ride up and scalp them also. But he
He just
figured,
wanted to get. He was banking all that if they got off a couple rounds of that double canister and everybody charged together, that it would cause pandemonium, and that would be that. And it's exactly what happened. So in the end, the North lost over 2,000 guys in this fight, and the South lost 380.
Mm.
Yeah.
And there's an enormous number of wounded troops for the Union, too, probably from the canister.
The canister is the most deadly weapon in the Civil War. In my opinion, it turns people into pink mist. They had 1,600 Yankees missing. That's a lot out of 8,000 something. And he took 176 of the 200 wagons. Just an absolute total victory for Forrest against twice as many guys. But he counted on the weather, and he counted on the land, and he counted on the psychology, and he was right. And those 6-shooters helped. Of course, the North had 6-shooters for a while. They'd been using the Spencer repeating rifles, but now Forrest guys had them too. And they're just more motivated. You know, they're walking through miles of scorched earth of where they live, and seeing these starving women coming up. I mean, they were, it was a horrible, horrible war. Mm-hmm. And they finally get to do something about it to the guys that did it. And they gave them hell. So that's kind of
Northern Army was hit with a pretty bad case of syphilis where they'd all been raping the same people. That did a number on them. Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't rape as a policy, but it happened, and they kind of turned a blind eye. And they raped the black women worse or more often because they had no recourse. It's really sad what happened. Like, it really, really is nothing to cheerlead. I mean, war is hell, as Sherman said. Forrest does lose a battle at Tupelo, which is near Okolona. He wasn't in independent, complete control there. There's another guy, Lee, not Robert E. Lee, another Lee, artillery guy, that they got about 9,000 guys, and they're going to take on 14,000 Federals. And the Federals have built forts out of buildings that they tore down, and rails and cotton barrels, and they're kind of fortified, not in a proper, Mason-built fort, but in a field-built fort. Mm-hmm. And whenever you're attacking, you're on a disadvantage, and you're attacking people who are hiding behind and stuff. And they did, and they actually took the field. They actually ran the Yankees out of there and took the field. But Forrest gets shot again. This time in the foot, and there was rumors that he had been killed, and the North was elated. So he refused to go to the hospital after getting shot in the foot. He took a stagecoach and went on with his men and fired out of the side of the stagecoach with a pistol, and let them know, I'm here, so everybody knew he wasn't dead. But even though they took the field and ran the Yankees out of there, they did lose more men than the North did in that battle. I think that's the only time that Forrest lost more than he gave.
Do you know what went wrong in that battle? Besides he got shot? I mean...
Well, they were attacking troops that were fortified,
They were aware of that, though.
Yeah, he didn't care. He'd taken out forts before. And, they did win. As far as taking the field or whatever, but
taking territory.
Yeah, and they're outnumbered 14,000 against 9,000 and something, and that is pretty good odds for the South. There's usually outnumbered worse than that, at least in the Western theater. It was never ever fair. I mean, they are usually outnumbered at least 2-1, but in this one, the North, only had about a third more guys. So. Good for them. They didn't lose as bad as they normally did. But Forrest surrendered after he heard that Robert E. Lee had surrendered. He was like, well, then it's over. If that guy's done and that army's done, then it's over. And that's probably correct. So he he surrendered because he's not going to kill people when there's no hope of winning.
I don't know. A few days later, Lincoln was shot in the head.
Yeah, that was actually probably a bad move because it united the North a lot more when that happened, and it kind of made it worse.
I disagree.
For,
I've heard that a million times. I disagree. That guy had to die.
Yeah, well, he probably would have been a little more lenient on the South than these radicals that took over, because they ran all over Johnson. But I mean, you know,
he was gonna start sending black people to Haiti and all kinds of crazy ideas.
He already did. He sent them to Liberia.
But he was really gonna. That was his main thing after the war. Was relocating people and killing the Indians. I mean, he was.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have mattered. So he had to get shot.
Yeah. They still speak English in Liberia today because of so many people. They're just sent over there, and half of them. It's amazing they didn't all die. He just dropped them off with no provisions, basically. Like, here you go. You're back in Africa. Aren't you happy?
First thing they did is enslave the native Africans. I know. But he had some crazy ideas. And you look at what a mercantile prick he was. He needed to die. And, you know, Johnson was the spineless or whatever. And then Grant gets in. He's a drunk. Never saw a lobbyist he didn't fellatio on. So I mean, that's where the word lobby comes from. It's from Grant. So we just had a series of... This was the birth of the original neocon, is Abe Lincoln. He married corporation and state. That was it. And we're still, today, southern states are paying taxes, so the greatly indebted New York City and San Francisco's of the country can be irresponsible and waste all their money and implement programs that don't work. And why are people in Texas subsidizing New York's debt, right? And their lockdowns and everything else. That's why there's talk of secession again. It's because they married corporation and state is why. And it starts with Lincoln.
Yeah, and Forrest, you know, he definitely had his faults.
I don't call it a loss. He killed the president. They got the tariffs removed. That was the whole point.
No, the tariffs were increased by more than 50% after the war. That's not true. So, yeah, they shoved that tariff down the South's throat when the war ended. And that's what the war was about anyway.
There's nothing to trade when Sherman burned it down.
Yeah, that's what Sherman was a war criminal for sure. The North thought he was crazy. They almost fired him. He wasn't any great general as far as winning.
They you know, I take a little bit of pride though that Lakota and others killed Custer. So a little hat tip to Crazy.
Yeah, thanks for that.
To Crazy Horse and those guys for getting a little revenge for the South.
Yeah, Custer was terrible to them.
He was terrible. He was pro-rape. I mean, that guy's filth. Custer and Sherman.
Yeah.
There you go. Hall of Fame worst. Custer and Sherman. Definitely.
Sheridan too.
Sheridan's
awful.
Sheridan's awful, and Ralph Lane, who was not in the Civil War, but he's a total turd sandwich. All right, let's get to some Shekelchats. I know you got more on Forrest, but you want to say something about? I guess we covered Gump and all that, but let's do some Shekelchats. Starting from the bottom, we've got Maddie Brown says totally different subject, but wanted to know about Biden, Obama, and cages. Some pictures of kids in cages that were used as like anti-Trump propaganda were actually from 2014 under the Obama administration. He's the one that put them in cages, not Trump. That's all that was. Obama also deported more people than Trump, but nobody called him xenophobic or racist or whatever. Trump just, rather than deporting, created a travel ban so nobody got into the country in the first place and didn't have to be deported. Fire Pixie for 5 says, thank you for all the work you do. I'd rather pay you than cable. Truth is worth every shekel. Thanks. And she's from South Carolina, has a restaurant down there. Yeah, I think we're better than cable if you want an education, because it's a pretty low bar. You know, it's not that hard to be more informative than what the filth you have on TV. The History Channel, which my brother's been on, the History Channel 2 and all those, you know, Discovery and so on, they have really just bent the knee to infotainment. They don't care what's accurate or not. And it's scary. Because
Yeah.
some people watch that and go, haha, that's not true. But, ancient aliens and all this stuff, we are seeing, millennials especially, aren't sure whether that's true or not, right? They are not being taught real history. And it's not pathetic.
Both
It's
of my
frightening.
experiences with being on there were terrible.
Yeah, they lie about stuff that doesn't even matter. It's just anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew
they lie
Forrest,
right
who
to the
is
face.
the nephew of William Forrest, I believe, great nephew, whatever, says the only man he ever feared was his brother William, my ancestor. Not bragging by any means, but interesting. William was a warrior as well, though more of a pure force type. I think all of his brothers are pretty mean.
Yeah.
Paladin YYZ says, replenish your Goldschlager. I think you mean Jack Daniels, because it's either tequila or Jack. That's all I drink.
Oh, Jack Daniels began in Lynchburg, Tennessee, which is about 40 miles from where Forrest was born.
That's right. It was retroactively invented by Chuck Norris. William Hensley says, you guys should put together a world history book including all the blueberry deceptions. Happy belated holidays. It's been a while since I've caught a live stream. Keep kicking ass and taking names. That's a project of enormous size. I think we'll just make a bunch of videos about different things. William Hensley says names because it got cut off. I knew what you were saying. Thanks. Brett for 10. Brett's our moderator. He's been spamming the links to Rumble as well as Shekelchats. Says, cheers,
thanks,
sir. I love the Dawson Brothers Civil War talks. This is one of my favorites. Maddie Brown returns and says, can we see Scott? I mean, you kind of, it looks just like me pretty much, so.
Yeah, I turned on my camera. It'll probably freeze.
Here's Scott.
But
here's me. That's it.
Yeah,
he just smiles more. That's all.
But I guess it's not working. I don't know.
Your camera, it's behind the sky. Don't mess with that. I don't want to lose the stream.
Yeah.
He's on other videos, so you can.
I'd like to do. Yeah, you can Google me and write.
Yeah,
Hatteras
just watch
or
the
or Colony or something and get a million
Croatoan stuff. Exactly. Frank Chan says, Happy New Year's to the Dawson brothers. Thanks for the history lessons. Thank you, Frank. Happy New Year's to you. Chip Walker says, enjoying the show. I'm glad. Kevin Sanders, I always heard Forrest was tied to the KKK, but can't find any evidence one way or the other. Forrest actually died an abolitionist. And the Klan, like we know today, like lynching people and dressing up like ghosts and burning crosses and stuff, it didn't start like that immediately. But when they got into all the theatrics and violence, Forrest dismissed it. He rejected them. The movie Forrest Gump is full of shit. Reidner Rutenberg says high five. So high five to Reidner. Author says keep up the great work, Rye Guy. Old Raven 71 says I'm amazed at the logistical maneuvering during the Civil War. Brilliance boggles the mind. Yeah, they really did have some.
Yeah.
Just another level. And I've studied a lot of European wars and everywhere else where, you know, you see some pretty cool tactics, even from ancient times, by some of the greats and stuff. But it's at a time period, too, when there are a whole bunch of weapons got invented during the Civil War. So they had to adapt to these new things, repeat rifling, submarines, hot air balloons, whatever. All these things come out in the middle of the war, so, and Gatling guns and so on. So it's constant ebb and flow and tactics and, you know, and how to best utilize this and that. Trench warfare, Robert E. Lee implemented way before World War One.
The torpedoes at the water mines and all
water
that.
Water mines, torpedoes.
Robert E. Lee and James Longstreet were against using landmines, which the South did use briefly at Yorktown, Virginia, and then banned it because they just felt like it was a little too inhumane. Mm-hmm. But they still used them in the water, and I was going to do a presentation on the Hunley. We should do one on that
genius guy that wanted to make the electric water mine and all that. We'll talk about that later. Yeah. Well, I'm going to do one on Wood as well. Zachary Taylor's ancestor that went in swashbuckling style. We're going to do a bunch of Civil War streams. Yeah, we're gonna stick to
yeah,
Shekelchats for now.
The Jackson Valley campaign. The Jackson Valley
The
campaign is
Jackson
what.
Valley campaign. This is why I like Stonewall was. He's my number 2, like even above Forrest, because of that. But anyway, Tony B says Sid Meier's Gettysburg Great Civil War role playing game. All right, so Sid Meier's that did Civilization. You ever played the game Civilization?
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I
remember that.
got
Put
a
a
visitor.
phalanx in your city.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, Leo.
I know. Can you go help?
Yes.
Thank you.
No.
You can help.
Here's Messi.
It's okay. Here's Messi, he said. Matthew Forrest again, who is an ancestor of Nathan Bedford Forrest and William Forrest, says, my understanding of his Ku Klux Klan affiliation was that is what was a paramilitary group formed to stop the North from arresting Southerners after surrender for war crimes. Later disbands the KKK, orders the robes burned. 40 years after the death of KKK comes back again. Yeah, and it really, when you say the KKK, it's really the KKKs because they're an independent group. Hold on just a second.
It's not TV time.
It's not TV time. That's
Yeah,
right.
one of them, like he just said, was pretty accurate. The one that operated in the 1920s that was lynching people is far worse than the original one. And the one that's still around today can all go to hell for as far as I'm concerned. But they're just an embarrassment to the South, honestly.
A lot of it's Hollywooded up too. I mean, there were lynchings like as recently as the 1980s. A gay person was killed by people who claimed to be part of the Klan, and there's no excuse for Emmett Till. A lot of other lynchings, though, Klan or not, that happened anyway, even without a Klan, that a mob would get together and kind of have extrajudicial Southern justice where, like, if somebody raped somebody, which back then, you know, outside of the war context was very horrendous crime and almost unheard of, they rarely made it to trial. Like, if everyone knew you did it, you got lynched and hung right there on the spot. And that happened in the North, too. So lynchings and duels were just sort of the way it was back then. Hold on again. Sorry.
Yeah, it was legal to duel. In the end, Forrest had 29 or 30 horses shot out from under him, depending on what you read. Shelby Foote says 30, so that's probably right. But King Philip, I forgot to mention, his favorite horse, hated the color blue, and horses are semi-colorblind, but they can see blue. And he had been in so many battles and charged and fought that anytime he saw people wearing blue, he'd try to kill them. And some Memphis police were visiting Forrest after the war, and a horse went nuts in the barn and bit one of them. And they said, "My God, General, even your horse hates Yankees." But I just thought that was funny. The horse would go into battle with its mouth open, screaming, and his ears pinned back, making noises like what do you call those, pachyderm things or whatever. Park. What are those things that those giant llamas? Help me out. They scream like a human. Oh well, it escapes me.
I had to step out. Were you talking about King Philip and about biting the police and all that?
Yeah, and what's the name of that animal? It's kind of like a llama. It
Pelosi?
Screams like a human.
Pelosi?
No.
Alpaca thing?
Where's it? Yeah. What's it called?
Alpaca.
Yeah, alpaca. Yeah, it would scream like one of those, and all with its ears pinned back anytime it saw people wearing blue. So King Philip's kind of lucky. Forrest lost a lot of horses.
Can you hold the floor? I got children's stuff to do. Hold on, I'll be back.
Yeah.
Any other Forrest story? Let me give you a Shekelchat question you can handle too. Let me see.
Okay.
Sydney Infante says a little money towards a diaper fund for baby Dawson. Cecil Burns, Dawson Brothers shows are my favorite. Sal, love the show, buddy. Here's some money for your favorite Confederate Yankee. and Fire Pixie, Big Rebel Yell from South Carolina. Kyle Level for the Dawson and Dawson show. That is all. She just rang the bell with a Benjamin on the Kyle Level. DJ Coddill.
Hey, thank you.
She's awesome always. You don't have to go into detail, but how true are the protocols? All right, that's a question for me. I'll get back to that one. Sergio Boner Sabatone, Gettysburg movie pretty accurate. It's 4 hours long. I don't want to waste my time if it's full of shit. Keep up the great work, Ray Ray. You can handle that about the Gettysburg.
I got that one.
Okay,
So,
get that one.
All right, no, it's not very accurate. Some parts of it are, but I'll tell you the two things that are the least accurate in that movie is at one point General Lee dresses Stewart down, and Jeb Stuart's kind of blamed for not being there, and that's bullshit. That didn't happen. And Stewart was doing all kinds of good things for the South, and he did arrive, and Lee never dressed him down, and that didn't happen. And they also portray Robert E. Lee as this short little fellow, and he was 5'10", which back then was actually kind of tall. I've never understood that. Grant was a little guy, but Grant wasn't even at Gettysburg. They kind of overplayed Chamberlain's role, but it's based on a book in 20th Maine. They are heroes for standing their ground, but they exaggerate that to no end. And there's a lot wrong with it. It's hard to explain without a map of Gettysburg, but there's a really key component called Zimmerman's Woods that's not mentioned at all, and they have it in the wrong spot. The brief time it is mentioned, actually, but that they show the first day where the Iron Brigade is getting murked, and they were very brave to hold their ground, and they got destroyed. The second day, they kind of make it look like a Northern victory the second day, and it wasn't. The South almost ended the entire war the second day of Gettysburg. Put it this way. In the 3-day total, it was actually 4 days, because the fourth day of Gettysburg, which no one talks about, the Confederates never left the field. They continued to exchange artillery a little bit, and it was not until the next day that they left. But on the 3-day total of the real fighting, 23,000 Yankee casualties, 28,000 Confederate. 12,000 were in Pickett's charge alone, right? So if you minus that and look at that, means the first 2 days things must have been going really well for the South. For the North to still lose 23,000 guys, the South only lost 5,000 more than the North did. I can't tell you how many times the North lost 5,000 more than the South. They lost 12,000 to the South's 3,000 at Fredericksburg. They lost 17,000 to the South's 12,000 at Chancellorsville. They lost over 10,000 to the South's 1,000 at Cold Harbor. The Battle of the Wilderness, the North lost 18,000 to the South's 10,000. Spotsylvania, the North lost another 18,000 to the South's 9 or 10,000.
By the way,
so the number of times that the North got beat as bad as the South did in Gettysburg were numerous.
Fredericksburg, Cold Harbor, it just on and on.
On and on and on. But Second Manassas, the difference is the North could replace them and the South could not. It was a game of Tetris. No matter who the best Tetris player in the world is, eventually the computer wins. As they just keep coming. It was a cruel mathematics of war. General Grant, in the final summer, lost more men from his army than Robert E. Lee had in his army. Grant didn't outsmart Lee and outfox him, and he wasn't a better chess player. He just won by sheer weight. The cruel mathematics of exchanging bodies for ground. And he always had more cannons and more equipment and repeating rifles and Gatling, every advantage in the world, and he continued to lose twice as many guys because Lee was the chess player and was incredible at where he was the one that was good at moving people around and better than anyone. He lost because it was ridiculous. The odds were ridiculous, and he realized that in the end, and he said, "I'm not going to continue this fruitless slaughter." And he looked to the west after he surrendered and put his fist into his hand 3 times, because that's where the South really lost, was out west.
If you look at an example, just a quick one, like Missionary Ridge, right? It was a Union victory. You got the South dug in at the bottom and top of this ridge. Grant's orders were to take the rifle pits to the bottom of the ridge and no orders further. He's like, you want to take and hold them there. Well, they were just getting slaughtered down there. And it's only because his men disobeyed the orders and went up the ridge anyway. Yeah, that they were able to get that. Grant's decisions.
There's a bunch of troops from Kentucky that did it.
Yep, it was great. Well, they're the best ones. But it's his decisions were horrible. He was going to lose that, which was, you had every advantage possible. And he was just going to lose on his tactics. And it's because they just were like, no, and disobeyed. And then he gets credited for it anyway. The only time the North did any success at all was probably under General Meade, I guess, at least on the East.
That was one battle.
And really, like, he would just lose less badly, right? And it wasn't because all the South's on the defense. The South went all the way through Maryland and all the way up to the capital of Pennsylvania, past Gettysburg. Right? They're on their way back.
They were on their way back.
Exactly. If they wanted to do what Sherman did and just start burning towns and stuff, they could have. They didn't believe in that. All right? And the Navy was all the way up in Maine, okay? They could have done some, John Paul Jones type stuff, but they had a little bit of civility.
Well, they did a little bit.
Mosby and Morgan did, but, that is...
Lee did burn Chambersburg, Pennsylvania,
because
which is
of
right
the
next to
munitions plants.
Yeah, but
that
he
is
didn't
not
do,
like
Sherman
Atlanta. That is nothing like that.
No, not the same at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because he wasn't. And most of the North didn't do that either. Is Sherman?
Well, that's half the Northern Army. So that is most of the North, but
yeah.
So let's see. DJ Cogdell says, you don't have to go into detail, but how true is protocols also? Is what happening in Europe part of the clergy plan, or is it just coincidence that what's happening lines up with it? My answers are, I cannot answer that on YouTube, which means yes and accurate. And that's all the detail I can say. It's not necessarily like a plan, like, we made this plan and are going to follow it. It's more like these were the desires of a certain group, and the blueberries... so many are in agreement with that replacement strategy is happening. It's also just shit-lib Europeans. Like, they open their borders. They're afraid of being called, racist or xenophobic if they want to protect their own cultural integrity. Welfare states give incentives, to move non-productive people from one part to another where they live off the dole. And rather than bringing them up, you don't bring them up, they bring you down, right? Welfare doesn't work. Liberal everything doesn't work. And the sooner they realize that, the better. Like, if you really have a bleeding heart and you want to help people, A, stop bombing them. 2, stop predatory loans. Shore up your borders. Get rid of welfare. Have more jobs instead. People don't need money. They need jobs. And you just don't have enough, and they need skills. And they've done everything wrong. And you can blame it on the blueberries, but it's really blame it on the liberals, because the blueberry has no power without the liberal. They're in the majority. They're the ones making the decisions. Blame Boris Johnson. Blame, Slender Man, Theresa May. Blame them. Blame Merkel. Like Macron, who's a pedophile. These people shouldn't be there, and you can't just blame that all on the juice. Okay. Sergio Boner.
Shameless plug for Mosquito Fleet of Hatteras.
Oh, hell yeah.
This is a little book I wrote.
I got that
it's
there.
on Amazon.
Amazon.com. Brett can dig it up in a second. It's called Mosquito Fleet of Hatteras by Scott Dawson. And it's also on ancreport.com. Click on About, click on Books, and then click on Scott's books. So it's
mostly Confederate Navy, but...
Well, that's interesting because it's the least talked about, and it's equally important or more than the land. Stabone says in Gettysburg. Oh, I got that one. Okay. I think I called that Sabatone for some reason earlier. Todd Harvey. Ryan, what was your first red pill book or experience? The one after you read it, you said, how much else is fake, for example. I've kind of not been asleep in the first place. I've always been red pilled. But taking the Ted pill took me to another level. When I read the Unabomber's manifesto, I thought, I did not have confidence in my own beliefs. I thought, well, I'm just some idiot 15-year-old kid or whatever. When I learned that this, mathematical genius stuff had written this manifesto that perfectly aligned with my thoughts, I was like, okay, it is real after all, right? So that was a bit of a red pill for me. The Unabomber's Manifesto.
Bill Still was mine for
Bill
the
Still's
Federal
movie.
Reserve,
Yep, on the
VHS.
it was called
Money
Money
Masters.
Masters. It's 3 hours long. I interviewed Bill Still 3 times, I think. We talked about Kennedy and other stuff, but Zeitgeist is crap because Zeitgeist just copied Bill Still and me, and so they can eat a dick. And their third part of high-tech communism as a solution was just that's them talking on their own, and that was the dumbest damn thing I've ever heard.
Forgot about that.
First 2 parts, I had a movie called The Myth of Moses where I went over the comparisons of the Old and New Testament about, y'all have heard me talk about Jesus and stuff. I'll go on my atheist rants now and then. Don't you think it's weird that a film that was like about atheism and then about central banks and then like random communist crap, like that's somebody just copying other people's cool stuff and put it all together in a film, right? But they had a very high production value.
Yeah.
But they're just ripping people off. Bill Still is great though, and Ted Kaczynski was great. So those are my 2 as well. Bill Still is the
Thomas
man.
DeLorenzo, all of his books. But
Lincoln Unmasked.
the one Lincoln Unmasked is amazing. That's a great one.
I never liked Lincoln because I didn't like my second grade teacher was Mosquito Fleet of Hatteras. There, separation business and state. No, my second grade teacher was just like one of these shitty teachers that like favored the girls over the boys, and you even know that when you're 7 years old means it's damn obvious, And so whatever she said, I was like bullcrap, So when she was praising Lincoln, I'm like, well, that means the opposite, right? Her name is Miss Payne. And so I never believed it. I was like, I was like, they're not fighting over that. That doesn't make any sense. 2/3 of these people don't own anybody. Like, what'd they say? What'd they say themselves? I learned very early, like, history's written by the winners, right? By the victor goes. And so I'm like, well, what'd they say? So even when Al-Qaeda attacked and stuff, first thing I want to know, I go, well, what did bin Laden say was his reason? Not that I'm going to agree with whatever he says. I'm like, well, what did he say? Not what we say he say.
I tell you that.
Should always ask. Always look at the other side.
First Civil War book I ever read. First Civil War book I ever read. I still have it. It was actually the first book I ever read. Without being forced to for school. And it was by Richard Wheeler. And it's called Lee's Terrible Swift Sword. And it's just first-hand accounts. North, south, flipping back and forth. They'll go through a battle. They kind of go for a overview of what happened, and then back it up by like, and this guy from this regiment in Maine says this, and this guy from Connecticut says this, and on the other side, this dude from Alabama, who was on the receiving end of this thing, said this and that, and you read what all these guys wrote, and he must have gone to an enormous amount of effort to pull up all these primary sources and sprinkle them in where they needed to go. And I really liked that style, so I got a bunch of his books, but that was Richard Wheeler. And William Trotter is probably the best Civil War author for the Navy. He is ridiculous. And then overall, still the gold standard, written in the freaking 70s,
Shelby Foote,
is the giant Shelby Foote collection. You're just saturated with it. It's 1.5 million words. So, a little light reading.
I think Adam's book on, always brain fart on the name of it. It's like a quote from the Declaration.
When in the course of...
Yeah, in the course of human events. Yeah, I can never remember that. I have a glitch in my head about the name of that book. In the course of human events. That's a good one. Charles Adams, or Richard Adams, which one is Charles, whatever. My earliest red pill was probably in elementary school, learning that environmental organizations have almost nothing to do with the environment. It's just a pretext that they use to manipulate the value of land and who can use what. And they're always like, oh, the animals. And they get a bunch of do-gooders that are like, oh, the animals, but that is not what they're about. I'm watching the Atlantic Ocean come over my dad's property, and these dickweeds out there trying to block bulldozers because they think nature should take its course or whatever. That was pretty red pilling on me to say these these people don't care if you drown, if you lose your home and everything you have because of a bird or whatever. And it's not. It's just these authoritarian pricks. The same kind of Karens are like, put your mask on and save us all. They just want to boss other people around. That's all it is. All right. So next question or comment is from Tyler Rubel, who says, Ryan, what's wrong with people believing in false history and information? And is all hope lost for America? Thanks for giving me a great info. Native Pride. P.S. I would have scalped Lincoln, Grant, and Sherman. Well, Grant almost got shot too. Sherman did get shot in the hand. Yeah, I think scalping Lincoln would have been hilarious. What's wrong with people believing in false history? Well, that's why you got all this SJW nonsense now. What pisses me off is not just that people get it wrong. It's when
they feel justified to dig up Forrest and his wife.
When you lie to people like that, they feel like, well, it's okay to just shit on the South. You look at every Hollywood movie. We told this story before, but like, my brother asked two northern girls whether they would rather wake up in the morning and their left arm is gone, or have a southern accent the rest of their life and they can't get rid of it. And they were like, I'd rather lose my arm. Because the prejudice towards the South is that bad. And a lot of that's from Hollywood. And a lot of that's justified because they're like, Civil War, slavery, country bumpkin, racist, backward, cousin fucking whatever. You feel it demonizes populations. And right now, it's worse than that. Like, both accomplishment and treachery are being associated or given credit to race. And none of these things are happening because of biology. I mean, that'd be a very small slither of a percent, I suppose. But the reason that, one group does this to another is not because of what they look like, right? There can't be a more shining example than the two Koreas. They're both Korean. They both speak Korean. One's a communist shithole. The other isn't. There is no racial teleology to your political beliefs or your ideologies, philosophy, etc. That's all software, just like language. And you could have nearly 100% correlation, and it still has no causation. Like, everybody born in Japan speaks Japanese. But that is not because of their Asianness or whatever. Like, they automatically, that's because that's what you taught those babies to speak. You take a baby out of Japan and raise them somewhere else, and they'll learn Spanish or English or whatever. It's not part of their DNA, right? And so there are a lot of things where you can look at and go, well, all these people did X, Y, and Z or believe this and that. It doesn't matter. It's still not biology. Like, you raise people under a certain religion, probably most of them are going to believe that one. That's why you have whole regions of the world, like this side's Muslim, this side's Christian, this side's that. It's not because they reasoned their way into this belief. It's because that's what their parents taught them to do, or their society and culture taught them to do. That's why it's completely segregated. And you can't discount that by saying, well, a couple token here and there, believe, in the non-majority.
That's why you speak the language that you speak.
That's why you speak the language you speak, because that's what you were taught since you were 1 year old. And political beliefs and stuff, it's all software. It's not hardware. But what they're doing is they're blaming the genocide of the Indians and slavery and all this stuff on the white man. Or, it's the whites, it's the corporations, it's the whatever. And they don't look at specific policies and ideologies that lead to these disasters. Especially the Yankees. I mean, the Yankees actually prolonged the institution of slavery because of the protective tariffs and the economic squeeze they were putting on the South, made it less likely to get rid of free labor than otherwise. And they don't look at it like that. They don't see it like that. And anyway, it continued on afterward. We all know that. I've gone over the Battle of Blair Mountain. I did it on the Sam Tripoli show, etc. And that's a missing piece of history. The fact that from the 1866 on until 1928, people were still being paid in script. Means you can only spend this at the company store, the same people that employed you, right? This monopoly stuff. That's slavery. It's okay, now you get a wage, but we're going to rent your equipment to you, and the tent you stay in, and we're just going to get all the money we gave you comes right back to us. So you're still working for free. It's just slavery with a little finesse, you know. It's like, oh, you're going to go mine and do lumber and work the railroads, and you're going to get paid. But you know what? That pickaxe and that shovel, and you know, you're getting and the food and so on, and you can only get it from this place because your money's not good anywhere else. Like paying people in script is slavery. And there would be another revolt, a big coal strike in Colorado, huge, massive, over 1 million rounds were fired in the fight for Blair Mountain in Logan, West Virginia, and a couple other counties between the federal government and workers. That's how you actually got labor rights, not people with pink pussy hats, not like hippies with signs. It was people with guns fighting the federal government and saying, I'm not living in a damn tent. You're not paying me in script. And sometimes it was even worse than slavery because you were so expendable and you weren't so expensive an item. They didn't own you, right? So it's like, oh, you don't want to work like this? Then go starve to death. We got some new Irish coming off the boat and we'll just put them in there, you know. This struggle between the working man and labor versus the master class or whatever, the owner class, has been going on a long time, still going on, and went on long after the Civil War. And it's like all this history is missing. It's like 13th Amendment came, slavery ended, everything was great. That's just not true. And by getting the wrong history, you demonize certain groups, you glorify others that don't deserve it, you don't understand people's grievances, it prolongs tension. You know, having the truth is the only way to sort it all out. But modern day problems is blaming biology or accrediting biology. Like they go, oh, look at all the disproportionate number of scientific inventions that came from white guys or whatever. No, those things came from free markets. That's what's conducive to success, science, invention, etc., is having free trade. Doesn't matter what color you are. And you can see white, Latino, Asian, whatever. You make them communists, it will fail, right? You make it a theocracy, it's going to fail. What works is capitalism and free markets, liberty, getting rid of government intervention. And it'll work for anybody. And it won't, if you get rid of that, you're going to fail no matter what color you are, sex, whatever. But we have groups today that are just obsessed with identity politics. And if they knew history, then they wouldn't be. Because if you knew more history, you would say, well, we've seen the scientific center shift around. It was in ancient Greece. It was in ancient Babylon and Egypt. It's been in Persia. It's been in China. It was in Spain for a little while. It was in England. It was in the U.S. It's been in Japan. Everybody has their day in the sun, the little golden era. And obviously I've missed Rome. That was a big one. It goes around from group to group. But the common theme that all those places have isn't race. It's not biology. It's having sea trade and free trade. And nowadays we have it in the air, but the maritime Silk Roads are still very important and vital for the exchange of ideas, material, philosophy, and so on. Having the right ideas makes all the difference. Policy, trade, there's a list of things you need of ingredients to have a successful society, and your biological makeup is just way down there on the bottom. And I won't say it's not nothing, right? It matters a little bit, but they're acting like it's the be all end all, and it's just wrong. And I just don't think people would have such stupid opinions if they knew history more, because you'd be able to contrast and have so many counterexamples to go, well, that theory just is wrong, doesn't work. If the history economics too, like you wouldn't keep making the same mistakes if you could go look and see where things had succeeded and things didn't succeed. And all that comes from history. Like, why would you try to relearn everything every day? Like, we have all this data of what worked and what didn't from the past. But if you don't look at the past, you're doomed to repeat the same mistakes that people already made.
Yeah, if you understand the Iran-Contra and you understand the corruption from basically Kennedy's death forward, then by the time you get to 9/11, it's a lot easier to believe, yes, the government would do stuff like this. And
yes.
You know,
Al-Qaeda's not an independent actor after all. Never were. Right? Like, still aren't.
But if you don't know, if you haven't been watching it go on and on your whole life, it just seems unbelievable that us would be involved in any way, you know? because you don't know. They've
It's
always
too
lied.
shocking. Fraud? What do you mean? Okay, Russian bot FU57 says, Scott, have you heard of the guy who does checkmate Lincolnite videos? If not, please set him straight with facts and logic. Also, Ryan, I have an Amazon gift card I want to use on your books. Is there any way I can make sure you get the kickback from using it on A&C links? Yes, if you use the A&C link to go to the book you want on Amazon, then I will get a kickback. I have set straight that checkmate Lincolnite guy in the comments. I had like 400 and some likes. I like just sitting there and going through all his mistakes, and then he just erased it. So I don't know. I had to make a counter video. Do you know who they're talking about? It's this guy.
I'm not gonna waste my time on that, man.
It's just some dude, and he's like he goes over, like, one of the things he said is like, oh, they're saying the South was agrarian and the North was industrial, whatever. But then he compares, and he doesn't say cash crops. He goes over like how much food the North was growing, and I'm like, yeah, that ain't the argument. Agrarian is specifically cash crops, cotton and tobacco, which the North did not use and South did. He just butters over all this crap, but it's like he tells like 50 fucking lies in a row, and it just gets overwhelming after some point. And of course, does the whole South Carolina, the vice president was a dicky racist guy, and it's cherry picks all the information for his case, ignoring the rest. Doesn't talk about the Corwin Amendment. Doesn't talk about none of that stuff. Just goes over. Well, the taxes were the lowest they'd been in 40 years.
Yeah.
He does bring up nullification and stuff, and it's like, yeah. Jefferson Davis was arguing that nullification was to avoid war and stay in the Union, right? It was saying, here's a way that we can nullify these rules without having to leave the entire Union, right? We're still subject to your laws and stuff, but we're going to nullify these because they're so detrimental. And that threat did get the tariff incrementally lowered every 2 years. That was the compromise. But then Lincoln reversed all that and put the damage back where it had been. And they decided, fine, we're going to secede. It's just, and he also conflates the reasons for secession with the reasons for war. 100% the reason for war is because the North invaded the South. And they're retaking their forts because that's theirs. That is no longer U.S. territory. You cannot have federal troops there legally, right? And in every other secession prior in the history of the United States, nobody argued the legality of the secession. They just were like, please don't do it, right? Like, it was definitely, we seceded from England or from the UK anyway. Like, it was there. It's the United States. Prior to the Civil War, it's, the United States are. Afterward, it was the United States is, right? It's funny, too, the United Kingdom is very clever. They don't say the United Kingdoms, right? Because in Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland would think of themselves as a kingdom, too. They're like, no, it's the United Kingdom. What it really means is England. Because that is the bulk of the population, the money, and they're in charge of everything. Anyway.
Southern Ireland does consider themselves a republic.
Southern Ireland is Ireland. I'm talking about, they're not part of Britain. But Northern Ireland is, and
yeah.
Unfortunately. Yeah, I hope they leave.
It's so weird when you go there and you cross into Northern Ireland and there's all those like little British flags all over the road, and the money changes, and so many people in Northern Ireland work in the Republic of Ireland, and it's got to be a pain in the ass to have to exchange your money constantly like that.
Well, I thought they just traded in whiskey. No.
Oh, I will say
that was
one
part of the
biggest
whiskey rebellion, though.
Attractions there.
That was a real thing. People traded whiskey as currency. It was easier to transport than gold or whatever. But anyway, I'm gonna send him a link so he can look at it and share my pain. Matthew Forrest says, thank you for spreading the truth. Thank you for chiming in for the second time. Cecil Burns, what about the accuracy of Ken Burns' Civil War? Oh, God. It's where I first learned about Shelby Foote. It seems to remember, though, that the documentary also presented that Lee shamed Stewart for not being where he was needed at the appropriate time.
Yeah, it didn't happen. Did not happen.
These are the kind of things that Hollywood does. It's look at all the people, and this has happened just because of Forrest Gump. We're like, that guy started the Klan. This thing about Stewart, did you explain that while I was gone, or? Okay.
I did. So Ken Burns thing wasn't that horrible, actually. But anything that's on TV gets watered down and oversimplified, and it has to have a little bit of a northern bias to even get on TV.
Even now.
But Shelby Foot's on it, so that's one saving grace. And he's not like even though he's from Mississippi, he's very much admires Lincoln and Grant, and so he's pretty balanced as far as that goes. He also really loves Forrest. He has a painting of him in his house. I mean, Shelby Foot has passed away, but Shelby Foot is a really good writer. Mm-hmm. He's an expert in Shakespeare and all kinds of crap.
Yeah, I'm still on Team Jesse Wales. All right, so Sergio Boner Stabone says, "Thanks, Dawson brothers. Woo!" He gives us a Ric Flair woo. There's the Carolina guy right there.
Oh yeah.
Ken Burns is not bad for TV. That's all I'll say. I'm a little bit more mean than Scott is on this. I'm like, fuck that guy. I see it a lot, man. You let the lie go, and then they tell a bigger lie, and the bigger one gets debunked, but the original littler one stays. It's like moving the needle, you know. I can see where they're going. Fire Pixie for 3 says, Ryan, would you have a problem dropping the Discord link in Entropy Chat? No problem. That should be on the description on the YouTube page. So I'll just grab that right now.
Is it Mike Scruggs that did the Uncivil War? That's a book that goes into the politics.
Yeah, and he got ratioed on his Amazon reviews.
I don't know what happened. I had it.
Because they're all like, oh, look at the things I learned.
They
listed all this ridiculous stuff that's not actually in the books. And then they're all just sitting there repeating each other just to discredit him, right? This is still that important. There are a whole bunch of shit-lived Yankees that are like, cannot let this go. Like, that's their thing is crapping on the South. It makes them feel better than.
Goes against what I was taught in fourth
I get
grade.
to feel better than an entire group of hundreds of millions of people because I can dismiss them all because we're slavery or whatever. California, by the way, these little shit libs that go on about slavery and stuff, continued slavery way after the Civil War. They put the last Yanni Indian in a museum. They were still scalping people for money. That was a state law, not from the federal government. Their history and this whole thing was annexed from Mexico anyway. So take down their flag, right, with the bear on it, right? They're a bunch of racists. You can do that, anybody, right? All the slave ships had American flags on them, not Confederate flags. Like, you cannot find something repugnant, like in history, like they
Spanish
they
flags.
didn't want women to work or whatever. Like, yeah, Socrates liked little boys. Well, yeah, let's just get rid of all the Socrates work then, right? Like, you can't cancel people because they don't meet all your modern day standards of stuff, and half the time the stuff you're saying isn't right. I put the link by the way in there.
Didn't Lewis Carroll marry his cousin?
Einstein married his cousin, let's get rid of Einstein. He married his cousin. Incest, whatever. Midnight Blue says, did Jefferson Davis appreciate Forrest and his accomplishments?
Yes, Jefferson Davis.
Winning battles is liked.
Jefferson Davis catches a lot of heat because he's a politician, and Robert E. Lee said nobody could have done better than Davis did, and that's pretty good authority on it. Jefferson Davis, could have easily sided with Bragg, and he didn't. He gave Forrest his own command instead, and he did recognize.
Should have replaced him. That's his biggest mistake. Should have replaced Bragg with a fence post. And they would have done better. Bragg belonged on the North. That's how bad he was. Like, the North would screw up royally, and then Bragg would screw up almost as bad.
He wasn't as bad as the Northern generals, man, like Burnside and Hooker and some of them. Banks.
Well,
yeah.
He was like McClellan level.
A lot of them.
I mean, not even.
McClellan, let me tell you something. Robert E. Lee said McClellan was the best general he faced, including
He
Grant.
faced a bunch of scrubs.
McClellan was overly cautious, but he didn't get his men slaughtered the way that
McClellan's plan was going to work, and Lincoln just didn't want to do it because of the elections. He's like, that's what my opponent was advocating. We can't do that now. But they ended up doing it after he got elected.
Think about this. McClellan was not there at Bull Run. That was McDowell. The second Manassas wasn't McClellan either. They brought Pope over from the west. They needed one of these west generals to come show the east what's up, and Jackson kicked his ass. McClellan kind of botched it at Antietam. One of them led by Burnside, who replaced him, and Burnside got destroyed at Fredericksburg.
McClellan was slow paced, they would say, but like the Confederates went lighting all these campfires to make it look like there were a lot more people there than there really were.
His army was green, and he knew it.
Exactly.
McClellan is not a great general, but he's not as horrible as people.
That's what I was saying. He's him and Bragg are on around the same level. Bad, but not Yankee bad. Not like
Bragg.
I don't know who the worst general in the North was.
That's a
very hard question. Grant's up there.
Probably. No,
tactic wise, yeah.
He's not actually. He's not.
Drunk.
He's not. He's one of their better ones, honestly.
He had some commanders under him that were good. If they had listened to him, come on. It's because they were like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah, Upton was good. Grant wanted to do the same thing McClellan.
Yeah.
Because he was running for re-election against McClellan. So Grant's strategy was kind of stupid, but Lincoln forced him to do it. And he did. He was good at siege. He laid a siege on Vicksburg, siege on Petersburg.
6 times they did it on Vicksburg.
He realized he didn't have to outsmart Lee. If he just continued to keep the pressure on, eventually he'd win.
Yeah.
And you can do that. And Grant said if the situation had been different and I'd had the smaller army, I wouldn't have done what I did. I'd have done a different tactic. And it's easy to hate on Grant, but Lee whipped everybody's ass. It's like losing to Alabama.
Grant was losing out west too. He made bad decisions. It was just like there was no Lee in the west. He
did not lose out west very often.
He'd always lose more men and all that though. It's like if come on, dude, you don't defend Grant. Quit simping for Grant. You change the numbers and guns and all that, and you're just talking about the generals, right? You give the South all the stuff the North had, but they get Grant, whatever. It's like if Grant is outnumbered, outgunned, out artillery, all that supply lines up. He's dead. He's dead in one day. They couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And that's why I say he's worse than Bragg or any of the rest of them. Okay.
Yeah.
Tyler Rupel says, Ryan, what's the best way to woodshed Christianity and liberals at the same time? And I think I forgot one. It says, Ryan, what were some of the great native warriors throughout history? I'm also coming out of Piedmont, North Carolina. Just ordered my tomahawk. Well, my favorite is Crazy Horse, which everybody probably knows. Crazy Horse and Geronimo. Nietzsche, who is with Geronimo.
Red Cloud.
Undefeated. Red Cloud. Captain Jack. Tecumseh. Pontiac, obviously.
Geronimo.
Yeah, Geronimo was a stud, dude. Well, Nietzsche's the one doing the battle tactics and stuff, but Geronimo is a spiritual leader, and Haley. I said Pontiac he's
the whole thing on him.
We already did a stream about Pontiac, and of course King Philip, Juan Cheese. Man, there's a lot, but there weren't. Yeah,
really.
Juan Cheese for sure. There wasn't like this hero in the hill mentality. That they're kind of like the Japanese in that sense, like. If you ask, like, who's this badass Japanese person, like, it's more of, like, the whole nation or, like, the company or whatever. Like, you can name a whole bunch of Japanese brands, Sony, Panasonic, Nintendo, but you don't know a lot of Japanese inventors or scientists or whatever because they don't have this...
What was the name
guy? They don't have this Steve Jobs, Walt Disney type, like, this guy did it all. Because that's ridiculous. Like, they didn't. Nobody
I
did
know
at
one.
all. Like, there's people like,
I forgot his name though.
huh?
The Japanese guy, he was on like a whaling ship and he shipwrecked, and everybody drowned except for him and another guy, and Americans
The
picked
surgeon?
him up. And this is during Japanese isolation. They picked him up on a steamship and took him to America, and he lived over here for a couple years and learned a lot. And then he went back to Japan and totally revolutionized their navy. What was his name? And then when Matthew Perry came, they brought him out because he could speak English. And what was that guy's name? Why doesn't he have a statue?
Are you talking about?
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Tatsugushi?
Sure. I don't know what his name was. I forgot. But I just remember the story. You know, that's wild. You shipwreck, and then basically people you've never seen before with technology you've never seen before.
Doctor?
No, he was a whaler, but then he learned how to make steamships. Oh well, whatever.
Well, there's a guy named Ken Yuasa who's pretty cool, but by and large, they don't really hero worship. It's more like the company or the state or the prefecture. Like Osaka did this, Tokyo did this, more than like this dude.
Yeah, they threw him in jail for leaving.
Yeah, they would. But it's like a lot of Native Americans,
they pulled him out of jail.
The heroicized ones are done by the enemies they defeated more than the Indians themselves. They would say, like, the Lakota don't really worship crazy horses as they do, like the Lakota did this. We did this. Like, all of us. They think differently like that. But I think Chief Red Cloud...
Russell Means.
Yeah, Russell Means is a stud. Red Cloud's one of the more unsung hero types. You know, everybody's heard of Geronimo and Crazy Horse. I don't know.
He never lost.
Was a man.
He quit while he's ahead,
dude.
He learned how to quit while he's ahead.
There've been a lot of Native Americans that
brother.
have won like legal suits and stuff too, like Robert Yellowtail and all. So he's not always on the battlefield. All right, I'll let you go. That was Scott on Nathan Bedford Forrest. We do native streams from time to time, so we'll get into that. I like Robert Yellowtail. He lived to be like 109. So even though the BIA would bottleneck his court cases and stuff, he lived to see his day in court and won them anyway. He's out there in Montana. Okay, woodshedding Christianity. I think like any other religion, it depends on how it's practiced. Kind of religion is as religion does. So like one of my favorite people in the world is Ron Paul, who's a Christian, and his version of it doesn't bother me, right? Like, it just depends how something's practiced. Now, if you just want to say something's true or not, then obviously all the magical miracles and mythical creatures and stuff in the Bible, if you're going to take it literally, is just kind of silly. But taking as metaphors and allegories and stuff, or as a guide, a person can morph their faith, or any book really, Mother Goose, whatever, in comic books, you know, into something that works for them. And I don't have this in a religious sense or anything, but I do think I've gotten some good moral fiber from Spider-Man and Superman and He-Man. These kind of, I know it's fiction and all, but like the principles there, Spider-Man, for example, what sets him apart from other heroes, because you're like, if they're making billions of dollars off these characters, why doesn't somebody just copy that? It's not so easy. It isn't based on superpowers and stuff. What makes Spider-Man so appealing to me is that despite all the crap that happens to him, his girlfriend being killed, his parents being killed, his uncle being killed, never has any money, misses dates, trouble with his job, his boss, like you name it, it's all happened to him, but he remains happy. He doesn't get broken, and he doesn't get dark. He's not like Tony Stark or Batman or whatever. They're just morbid, like my parents. But he finds a way to joke and be jovial and defeat depression and these thoughts by looking at other aspects of life and continuing on. He's able to move through what would cripple most people. You know, his girlfriend's back being broken and all the things that have happened to him. Just the worst luck. And he laughs it off. Superman is special because of his moral compass. You know, other anyone else with those powers probably wouldn't use them the way he does. They'd be self-aggrandizing, whatever. It's, and most people, how does that like religion? It is. Like I found something I admire, people that have this set of behavior, whether it's ancient heroes too, and demigods and so on from other religions. I know Thor and stuff aren't real, but I aspire that kind of warrior mentality and honor and so on as something I want to emulate. Jesus too, like this dude had, whether he's real or not doesn't matter to me, the wisdom in it is valuable. And same with other holy books to me. And I just cut all the stuff that I think is ridiculous. Other people are true believers. They're like, no, this guy is valuable because he's a son of God and blah, blah, blah. You can think that if you want. It doesn't bother me as long as you are a good person. So, and likewise, I don't think you should shit on atheists or Buddhists or whatever because they don't believe in Muhammad or Jesus or whatever it is, right, that you do. It's all about whether or not it works for you. And I've met good people from Shinto, from Christianity, from Islam, from whatever. And I met a lot of shitheads from all the same faiths. So to me, religion's like a car. And you're the driver. So car does affect how you drive. But whether or not you swerve off the road and hit things and stuff is because you did it, not because it did it, right? You're ultimately always responsible for your own actions. So it's not intrinsically bad or good. It's intrinsically false. But you can use fictions as long as you're aware of it, being fictional, to inspire you into becoming a better person and have growth and good guidance. Now, you can also not know it's fiction and still do the same thing, but then you're at the mercy of the pulpit, because if they want to manipulate you into doing something bad, they can. And if they want to get you to do something good, they can. So it's Voltaire's old quote is, people who believe in absurdities can be convinced to commit atrocities, is true. But people who believe in absurdities can also be convinced into great acts of altruism as well. It depends on who the leadership is. And so, but I don't like that. I say lead yourself, be good, and you don't have to rely on anyone. Read all the holy books, read all the texts, read all the philosophy, pick out the good, dismiss this bad, and you're just going to have to use your own reasoning and have confidence in your intelligence to be able to decide right from wrong without having some sort of allegedly objective source, which obviously isn't. Let's see. The Geezer 30 says, lads, are you going to do a show that is more native centric of their fighting causes during the Civil War? Also, will you be doing native history from other eras, whether it be pre-76 or after? That isn't the bury my heart at Wounded Knee narrative, as I've read, that is good, but more native history that is pre-war. Yeah, I mean, my brother's books on the Croatoans start in the 1590s. All right, this is pre-Powhatan. This is pre-Massachusetts and Virginia colony. That's as early as you can get with contact, and then we can go even earlier than that. Although there isn't as much known, other than what people were building, how they were living. We don't know so much about the culture prior to the 16th century, but we can walk through there on up. And I know a lot about the Jamestown colonies and whatnot, and I know quite a bit on the Apache, Zuni, Hopi, Lumbee, Tuscarora, and the Navajo or Diné. That's kind of my zone. And my brother is more of the Iroquois speakers and stuff, and then we trade off and talk to each other. So Athabascan, Iroquois, and we can get into all that and what happened and what their thoughts were, and you can do Civil War or after or before. Plenty of history, plenty of things to talk about. I like reading the accounts from natives that were taken to Europe, and they saw Paris, they saw London, saw these supposedly great European cities, and their thoughts were they were horrified, like, because back then the rivers were polluted, people were drunk in the street, they flogged women in public as a punishment, right? Public floggings, guillotines and so on, and they just thought they were completely barbaric. And it's hilarious that the things they focused on were just the number of people and just how the discrepancy between the leadership and the peasant folk, right? How this queen has to have armored guards, and they have feasts of food that they waste while people outside have nothing to eat or very little. And why don't they share with their tribe? They can't walk among them. They're guarded from their own people. So it's like it's tyranny. Like when you have a leader that has to live with a wall around them and then guards inside of that, it's like maybe your leader's doing something wrong if your entire public wants to kill you, that you have to be protected 24 hours a day. Whereas the chiefs lived among the people. They based things on merit. They were charitable. No chief had to live on a mountain with a wall and a guard like that, because then they wouldn't be the chief. And they were confused how the Europeans would allow these elites to, these elitists to like be the leader. Like, why are they the leader? Oh, they just inherited or whatever. They haven't demonstrated any skill or feat or anything. And they're so bad and awful. They live in all this wealth while you have none, and they have to protect themselves from you all the time. And yet the peasant class doesn't realize it and will go on the battlefield and kill for a king they've never met, to take land from people away that they did no wrong to, that did no wrong to them, and then give it away to somebody who's already hundreds of times wealthier than they are, and are willing to die to steal land from someone else and award it to somebody that supposedly is your ruler, who doesn't care about you at all, and that would flog you in the street if you crossed them. Like, they were so confused about European society. And it's funny to see that fresh look at it. Like, yeah, it is really upside down. And but if that's all you've ever known, Europeans are like, well, he's the king. And so I like reading those accounts. I think that'd be a good stream. Just read some of the accounts that were given by some of these natives that visited Europe, what they thought. They're really appalled by the pollution too. Like, you don't take care of your rivers, you're not good stewards with the animals. And anyway, Arthur says, hey Ryan, you ever plan on taking Johnny Splat to the woodshed? No, I think Johnny Splat just wants attention, and he's not going to get it from me. Like, all his crap is a bunch of lies. He's splicing stuff together that's like got 18-year gaps apart between something I said when I'm 22 and something I said when I'm like 30 something or 40 something, and no context. It's just some little shit that refuses to debate. He's kind of like BOC in a way, has other minions go after it. And Ali Bishai and some of these douchebag Jerseyites like amplify these guys' voices. I'm like, why are you feeding the trolls? Why? You do that and then there'd be a million more of them, right? All doing the same kind of hit pieces and crap. You know, plus he's not a public figure, so I'd get in trouble for a woodshed, because that's what they do. I've done that in the past and they give me a strike. To woodshed somebody, they have to be like a politician or, you know, a famous dead person, whatever. I can't just be mad at my friend or something and like trash them online 3 hours. That would be horrible and defamation, and it'd be irresponsible. It's not even if it was all true. That's just mean. You got to think that would ruin their life, you know. Whereas if it's Pelosi or something, who cares, right? Public figure, fair game. But to just some little dork online, I wouldn't even do that to Chris Dorsey. It's like, that's mean as hell, you know. I wouldn't want that done to me. Some megalithic channel just dumping on me, and I have no means to say anything back. Oh wait, that happens. The ADL and SPLC and all that, they'll lie about me and stuff. You know, the difference is they're lying. I'd be telling the truth. So that guy can go fuck himself. A Bald Guy Creation says the CSA was the best, and it will be again. That's right. True Grit says, I linked in a tweet in an old 2014 interview you did about the Civil War as to get that Confederate checkmate to debate you, but never got a response. Says Nick Diaz says, don't be scared, homie. Link to a tweet. So I did a 2014 interview about the Civil War. I don't even remember. I probably did. I know I did a bunch right after that Dylan Roof asshole went and shot black people in South Carolina. Like, he shot other Southerners, right? But somewhere on Facebook he had a Confederate flag. So like, oh, that's why he did it. That's why he shot black people. He had a Confederate flag. He also had Gold's Gym and many other interests. It's irrelevant to what he did. The guy is a murderer. He's in jail. He belongs in the electric chair. That's got whether or not he liked Pokemon or not, whatever, that has nothing to do with why he shot people. And okay, he admired the South, whatever. He is bought into the propaganda that you have created, saying the South's a bunch of racists or whatever. You helped give him an identity. Should have taken that away. Stars and bars, this is a flag for veterans. Everybody was pardoned. Even Lee was pardoned by President Ford. This is the Confederate States of America. Still America, since the North wins the war, and so the secession was never valid. That means it is a civil war between Americans versus Americans. This is a veteran flag of Americans, and it honors veterans, and it honors those fighting to defend their homes from an invading army. It's not about the particular... Nobody wants statues of Southern politicians, right? No one wants a statue of the vice president of the CSA, right? It's honoring the generals or soldiers every time. A.P. Hill, Stonewall Jackson, Longstreet, Robert E. Lee, guys like that, Nathan Forrest. Those are the heroes. General Hoke deserves one, in my opinion. And I like to build more. I want to GoFundMe. I can't use GoFundMe, but some equivalent of that to create a bust, if I can, or an entire statue, and put it in North Carolina on private property. And you touch it, you're getting shot. That's my goal. Fire Pixie says, I need the truth about something. I know South Carolina was the first to secede from the United States, but I've also heard the tale that it was the first state that want to secede from Britain. Revolutionary War talk, true or false? No, quite the opposite. South Carolina had a lot of Tories during the Revolutionary War and did not want to secede from Britain. Did. But it was not the first. It definitely wanted to leave the United States during Civil War times, and should. I mean, they had every reason to. They were getting economically squeezed more than anybody else. But during the Revolutionary War, the irony, it was mostly the Northeast that wanted to leave from Britain. It was Boston and places like that. That's where you have the Boston Tea Party. It was Massachusetts in particular. And then you have Lexington and Concord and all that. That was mostly up in the Northeast. The South would have more victories, and guys like Washington, Valley Forge, and so on. But General Greene was clever enough to do tactical retreats to draw the British deeper and deeper inland away from their gunboats and navy. And by the time they realized that, it was too late. They were just setting a trap. And so a little bit of guerrilla warfare. This whole thing about the British lined up in lines and the Americans were guerrilla fighters and that's why America won. That's bullshit. Like almost half the battles the British won, and the battles that the Americans did win were by Continental troops who also lined up and fired volleys. Like, guerrilla warfare is annoying. That's not how you win a battle. Everyone knew this. Some of the sharpshooters and militiamen and minutemen and stuff had an impact, but the Continental regular army won those big battles. Like, it was regular soldiers, and they also fired volleys. And would not have been possible without the French blockading the harbor and giving material support to the Americans. Like, it's a war of attrition. You're talking about 8 years long. Cornwall had been defeated and all, but Britain could have sent another army, but they lost all public support, and while American support was strong. So several different things going on there. Is the war support in the U.S. was way stronger than in Britain. Britain probably had better equipment and regular troops and supplies, despite the long supply lines, because the infrastructure in the U.S. was in its infantile state and it had some really heavy winters and other things that contributed to it. But the U.S. had slightly better tactical command. They just made better on-the-field decisions with their generals, so that did help. But ultimately, what won the war is it was just losing support among the public in Britain, and it wasn't wavering in the United States. So they could have sent another army. They'd been winning about 50-50. They won most all their battles in Canada almost, and they'd won some significant battles, in the U.S. and all the states. They'd also lost some, but it just wasn't worth it. And then you had the French and the Spanish and the Netherlands all supporting the U.S. Nobody supporting Britain. They weren't like sending armies or anything, but they're giving material support, and the French did send the Navy in, so that was it for the British. They were not going to retain the colonies. It wasn't worth the price. The colonies weren't going to give up. Britain was not interested in fighting for another 8 years, so they lost it. And they decided, you know what, let them go and reestablish good trade relations, and we'll still make money off it and be allies. So we have been. I wish they had interceded and joined the South in the Civil War, because if we had British support, we definitely would have won that war. The South needed materials. The Geezer 30 says, Ryan, mate, you missed my first Shekelchat. It's a green one for 10. Okay, let me go down. I always miss some green ones. I had kids yelling and stuff a while ago. Going down. I still don't see it. I'm looking. There. I see one. Hello, lads. Ryan and Scott. Hope all is well. Just got on the stream. How come you've redone the Forrest show? Is it different from the first one? I assume so. I have new things to learn when I see the replay, as I am late to the show. Yeah, we covered other areas, and also the first one got derailed by somebody asking about fluoride or some other nonsense, and I just got mad. And there were a couple things we forgot, and I was like, oh, we need to add that. And I was like, just do it over again. It was easier than saying, oh, we forgot to say this and this. So, listen to them both, but the second one was better, I believe. This is the best one. The Geezer 30 says, can't see your mug, Ryan. Oh, shoot. Okay. I forgot all about that. Gonna move Forrest over here. Can't see your mug. Now you can. Now. Says, that wonderful manly stature of Forrest is obscuring your saintly mug. Well, that's a very flattering words. Fire Pixie says, come on, man. How are you going to Israel, the Geezer Shekels? Pop, pop. I know a bad dude. Don't make me send him your way. I got the Geezer Shekels. Cecil Burns says, I vote for a Native American account of European society stream. That sounds really fascinating. Have you never read it? The stuff they said? It's hilarious. It's so innocent, like, men dressed in black thumping on a book, and they've got a dead man on a stick. They're talking about the crucifixion, and they worship this person, a human being nailed to a piece of wood. They thought they were demons. Like, if you don't understand the language, right, and you just see people bowing down and singing and crying and all this stuff, they've got a guy, nailed to a cross with a crown of thorns and blood running down his face, like they worship a torture victim, is what it looks like to natives. And they ring these bells, and it's just like these men in robes that people are afraid to even whisper at, and and these books. And books were weird. They didn't have books. They're like, whatever's in this paper, that's everything they do, and they're like amazed that because the polymath was dead, the Renaissance man was almost gone. It was like they couldn't hunt, they couldn't fish, they didn't have skills, and that's why they would labor at some other pointless endeavor, and they'd have to buy their basic goods from others, from the merchant class, right? They buy their fish every day, they buy their bread, and sometimes they couldn't, but they're just a bricklayer or a whatever. And it's like, why don't you learn how to fish and hunt and build and all the primary skills first? They didn't understand the specialization and stuff. So it's pretty interesting. I don't know if it's a stream or what, something to do in the future. Horsecock Johnson for 3 says thumbs up. Are you guys interested in a native account of Europe stream? It's funny reading the accounts from Japan and stuff too when they first came to Europe, or when they first came to the Americas. China actually came in 1429, which is also before Columbus. And the most shocking thing was learning about Native American societies and how they did not have taxes, didn't have jails, and didn't have walls around their cities. They thought, what? How can you not have a wall or taxes? And without a jail, what do you do when someone commits a crime? Like, where do they go if you don't lock them up in a cage? Of course, the natives didn't need any of those things, and didn't have any lawyers either. That amazed the Chinese. No walls, no jails, no taxes. Everything else was pretty similar, but they couldn't fathom why. Who's the leader? Like, who tells you what to do? And they could not figure out how people could live without, an emperor or whatever. And the natives did, and they just didn't get it. Japan might be more interesting. So the Japanese account is pretty good. The first European accounts of Japan and China are interesting to read too. I mean, everybody was just so lost at describing it from their eyes, and of course it's wrong, but you kind of can see it. Russian bot FU57 says Homogard. I hope you're enjoying your Homogard. It will give you a subtle vibration to warn you when any Salami Wahhabi is near you. Salami Wahhabi, whatever the hell we said. Crenshaw cartoon is coming up. We should have that soon. Pop, hit the like button, says Snap Phase. Yeah, hit like, hit share. Our algorithm is pretty low. 405. These people that are mad about Confederate flags and stuff like that. It's like, have you even been to the South? Probably not. I met people in LA, they did a film in Mississippi, and they came out and they were shocked like how polite people were and how developed the city was. Like, it's just like here. I'm like, what the hell were you expecting? You're in Jacksonville or something? They went to like a city. Of course they have a mall and a Starbucks and all the same stuff as California. I mean, it's Mississippi, man. They're not, I don't know what their view is, just like we're out there on the porch playing banjos or something. Like, it's a city. That's how it is, man. And they didn't meet any racists. So, like, yeah, that's normal. Mississippi and Alabama, those two states get it worse. They're like, well, that's the deep South. Like, that's the extra, extra Southern. They're the worst ever, right? And they're not. But that's... Try having an Alabama accent and trying to get a job. And when you're not in Alabama, right? Not easy, man. You got to go into business for yourself. Please subscribe. We're at 79.6. So we're creeping up. We've been stuck at 79.5 for months. We've got completely show it on algorithms. Sharing this is the only way people see it. It's not going to randomly pop up in YouTube, right? So, and they did that because I was supporting Trump against the fraud. Still am. And that's what happened. There was fraud, whether you like them or not. They stole the election. That's pretty important. 79.6. If we could get that to 80, I'm dropping the Spinning Squirrel films. So, there you go. Someone says extra South. Hey, you should be proud to be extra South. There's so many movies that demonize the South. A lot of the backwardness and stuff is because of the Civil War, because so much property been burned down and farms destroyed, and then they weren't allowed to vote unless you were black. Caused people to move. If you had the means and money to move, you did. You just moved to the north, went to those schools, contributed to that economy, rather than starting over from scratch in the South. It was pretty hard to do. And so there was a brain drain, and they got put back years in education because the schools were burned. They literally burned the schoolhouses, the books and everything. They really had to start over like pioneer style, and a lot of them went west, or a lot of them went north. They did not stay where they were. They left for better opportunities. You got to start over anyway. Might as well get your own land and so on and see. And so, except for a few pockets of, untouched southern cities, they really got set back generations. And it wasn't always like that. They were the preeminent part of the educated and the more intellectual elite were in the South, not the North. But after the war, that all changed. They burned all those southern mansions, those nice homes. They just looted, murdered, raped. And you had carpetbaggers and scallywags redistributing the wealth from the South to the North after the war as before. So, yeah, reconstructions, that's one we need to do. I think I'm going to do that with the Libertarian Institute at some point. I'm more harsh than Scott. He tries to softball it because he's trying to appeal to like more audience or whatever. But I'm like, don't do that. Just tell the truth. Like, I'm not going to sacrifice. I'm not going to like sugarcoat this or that because more people will like it. I don't care if you like it or not. I'd like you to like it, but not at the expense of changing the truth. In the long run, if you exaggerate or you omit information or anything at all, that will catch up to you, I think. And I just am not going to do it, man. Lincoln needed to be shot. Yes, he did. Midnight Blue says, I think Steffens would have made a better president than Stevens. Some say any man that had that job had a full plate. Let's just say that. And Davis was stricken with illness and stuff at the end of the war. And he won they had to pardon him because legally no lawyer, not even Yankee lawyers, could make the case that what they had done was illegal. And so they kept him in prison for a while, but ultimately they had to give him a pardon. Todd Harvey says, I know a guy who had to do something at his company because the Michigan branch kept calling down and ordering stuff just to hear his secretary's accent. Jesus. Hey, what is the Hillary song? The Hillary songs on A&C is called Fuck Hillary. I think you'll really enjoy it. So people kept calling and ordering stuff just to hear the accent of the secretary. God. That's even today. I will stand up for voiceless people. I had to lose the majority of my southern accent. Sometimes it comes back. Sometimes I don't have one at all. Depends who I've been recently talking to, but I cannot get people to take me seriously unless I talk the way